The grand chamber of the Galactic Council stretched far beyond what human eyes could easily comprehend. Thousands of delegates from hundreds of worlds sat in curved rows that spiraled upward like a massive amphitheater. Holographic displays floated in the air, translating every word into countless languages. The war was over. The Void Swarm had been defeated after 3 brutal years of fighting across dozens of star systems. Han Minho stood at the back of the human delegation, trying not to fidget in his formal uniform. He was just a corporal, a combat engineer who spent most of the war repairing damaged ships and building field fortifications. He had no idea why he'd been ordered to attend this ceremony. Ambassador Park Ji-won and the other important humans stood at the front, while Minho and a handful of other low-ranking soldiers were apparently there just to fill out the group. The council speaker, a being that looked like living crystal, raised its many-jointed arms. "We now honor Queen Lyrae of the Stellarum Empire. Her forces held the line at the Battle of Crimson Nebula. Without her sacrifice, we would all have fallen to the swarm." Queen Lyrae rose from her seat. Minho had never seen a Stellarum before. She was tall and impossibly elegant, with skin that seemed to shift between silver and pale blue like light moving across water. Her eyes were large and violet, and when she moved it was with a grace that made everything around her seem clumsy by comparison. She wore robes that seemed woven from starlight itself. "The Stellarum Empire accepts the gratitude of the Council," she said, her voice clear and melodic. "We are prepared to name our reward." The chamber fell silent. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Stellarum had lost millions of their people in the final battle. They had every right to demand whatever they wanted. Minho had heard rumors that she might ask for exclusive mining rights to the resource-rich worlds near the nebula, or perhaps access to the advanced weapons technology that several species had been hoarding. Queen Lyrae turned slowly, her eyes scanning the assembled delegates. Then she did something unexpected. She pointed directly at the human section. "I want a human," she said simply. The chamber erupted. Thousands of voices rose at once, their translators creating a wall of confused sound. Ambassador Park's face went pale. The other human delegates looked at each other in shock. Minho felt his stomach drop, though he wasn't sure why. Surely she didn't mean him. The council speaker struggled to restore order. "Your Majesty, please clarify your request. You wish to establish a human embassy on your world, a trade agreement with Earth?" "No," Queen Lyrae said calmly. "I want one human, a single individual. They will live on my world for 1 year as my guest. That is my reward." The Galactic Council had never seen anything like this. The Talaxian delegate, a creature of shifting shadows, spoke up. "The humans are the newest members of this council. They are primitive. They still fight wars among themselves on their own planet. What possible use could one of them be to the mighty Stellarum Empire?" Queen Lyrae's expression didn't change. "That is my concern, not yours. Do the humans agree to these terms?" Ambassador Park looked stunned. He whispered urgently to his advisors, then activated his translator. "Your Majesty, we are honored by your interest in our people. But we must know more. What would this human do? What would be expected of them? And most importantly, who would you choose?" For the first time, Queen Lyrae smiled. It was a small expression, barely there, but somehow it made her look even more otherworldly. She raised one long finger and pointed again at the human delegation. But this time, she wasn't pointing at the front where the ambassadors and generals stood. She was pointing at the back. She was pointing directly at Minho. "That one," she said. "The young male in the engineer's insignia. He will do perfectly." Minho felt every eye in the chamber turn toward him. His mind went blank. His heart hammered in his chest. This had to be a mistake. He was nobody. He'd barely seen combat. He'd spent most of the war in the rear, fixing things that other people broke. Ambassador Park's voice came through the translator, careful and diplomatic. "Your Majesty, Corporal Han Minho is a fine soldier, but he is not a diplomat or scientist. Perhaps someone more experienced would better serve your purposes?" "No," Queen Lyra said, and there was something final in her voice. "Him. I have made my choice. Does the Council accept my reward, or do the humans refuse?" The human delegation huddled together, arguing in whispers. Minho caught fragments of the conversation. Some wanted to refuse, saying it was too dangerous to send someone to an alien world with no understanding of what would happen. Others argued that refusing would be a massive insult to the Stellarum, who had saved countless human lives during the war. Finally, Ambassador Park turned back to the Council. "We accept, Your Majesty. Corporal Han will serve as your guest for 1 year, if he agrees." All eyes turned to Minho again. He swallowed hard. What could he say? If he refused, he'd be the human who insulted the aliens that saved Earth. If he agreed, he'd be sent to an unknown world for an entire year, with no idea why he'd been chosen or what he'd be expected to do. "I agree," he heard himself say. His voice sounded strange in his own ears. Queen Lyra nodded, satisfied. "Excellent. Corporal Han Minho, you have 24 hours to prepare. A ship will collect you from your delegation's quarters tomorrow at this time. You may bring personal items, but no weapons and no military equipment." She turned to the council speaker. "My reward is claimed. We are finished here." As the queen swept out of the chamber with her retinue following behind, the entire council broke into chaos. Delegates shouted questions, demanded explanations, and argued about what this could mean. The human delegation surrounded Minho, everyone talking at once. But Minho barely heard them. He stood frozen, his mind racing. 24 hours. In 1 day, he would leave everything he knew and travel to an alien world with a queen who had chosen him for reasons no one understood. He wasn't a hero or a genius. He was just a soldier who was good at fixing things. Why would she want him? What did she see that no one else could see? And what would happen when he arrived at her world and she discovered she'd made a mistake? The questions swirled in his head as the human delegation led him from the chamber. Tomorrow, his life would change completely. Tonight, he had to figure out how to say goodbye to everything he'd ever known. Outside the chamber's massive windows, the stars burned cold and distant. Somewhere out there was the Stellarum homeworld, waiting for him. Minho took a deep breath and tried to steady his nerves. 24 hours. The clock was already ticking. The Stellarum ship descended through clouds that glowed with their own inner light. Minho pressed his face against the window, watching as the planet Luminara revealed itself below. It was nothing like Earth. Vast forests covered the continents, but instead of green, they pulsed with soft blues and purples. Cities rose from the landscape like natural formations, towers of crystal and metal that seemed grown rather than built. Rivers of light flowed between them, and Minho realized after a moment that they weren't water at all, but streams of pure energy. The flight from the council station had taken 3 days. Minho spent most of that time alone in his cabin, trying to process what was happening. The Stellarum crew treated him with distant politeness, answering his questions with brief, efficient responses. They brought him food that looked beautiful but tasted like nothing in particular. They showed him how to use the ship's systems. But none of them would tell him why Queen Lyra had chosen him. Now the ship was landing at the palace, and Minho's heart raced. He'd changed into the formal clothes the crew provided, simple but well-made garments in shades of white and silver. His small bag of personal belongings sat at his feet, containing photos of his family, a few books, and the old watch his grandfather had given him before he died. The landing was so smooth that Minho barely felt it. The door opened and warm air rushed in, carrying scents he couldn't identify. Sweet, but also somehow metallic. The light was different too, softer and more even than sunlight on Earth. A Stellarim woman waited at the bottom of the ramp. She was shorter than the Queen, but still taller than Minho, with the same shifting silver-blue skin. Her robes were simpler, marked with symbols Minho didn't recognize. "Corporal Han Minho," she said, bowing her head slightly. "I am Lewin, Chief Advisor to Queen Lyrae. Welcome to Luminara. If you will follow me, I will show you to your quarters." Minho picked up his bag and followed her down the ramp. The landing platform was on top of a building that seemed to be made entirely of translucent crystal. He could see down through the floor, watching Stellarim people moving through the levels below. They all stopped what they were doing to stare up at him. "Why are they looking at me like that?" Minho asked quietly. Lewin glanced at the people below. "Word has spread that the Queen's chosen guest has arrived. Many are curious about humans. We have had limited contact with your species. But the way they're staring, it's like they're seeing something important. I'm just a soldier." "Perhaps," Lywin said, and there was something odd in her tone. "The Queen will explain in her own time." They walked through corridors that seemed to have no doors. Walls simply opened as they approached and closed behind them. Everything was spotlessly clean, perfectly maintained. The few Stellarim they passed all stopped and bowed toward Minho, which made him deeply uncomfortable. His quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms larger than his family's entire apartment back on Earth. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the glowing forests. The furniture was elegant but strange, designed for bodies slightly different from human ones. A table held platters of food, and Minho's stomach reminded him he hadn't eaten since breakfast. "The Queen requests your presence at dinner tonight," Lewin said. "Someone will come to guide you when it is time. Until then, rest. Explore your rooms. The windows will answer questions if you speak to them." After she left, Minho stood in the center of the main room, feeling lost. He walked to the window and touched the crystal surface. It felt warm under his fingers. "Can you really answer questions?" he asked, feeling foolish. The window's surface rippled, and text appeared in Korean. "Yes. What would you like to know?" Minho spent the next few hours asking about Luminara, the Stellarim people, and their history. The window showed him images and videos explaining that the Stellarim had been a spacefaring civilization for over 15,000 years. They had eliminated disease, poverty, and conflict from their society millennia ago. Their technology was among the most advanced in the galaxy. They were known for their art, their philosophy, and their perfect social harmony. But as Minho learned more, something bothered him. All the art looked similar. All the music followed mathematical patterns. When the window showed him videos of Stellarim cities from 1,000 years ago, they looked almost identical to the cities now. Nothing seemed to change. Nothing seemed to grow. A soft chime interrupted his thoughts. A young Stellarim man stood in the doorway that had somehow opened without Minho noticing. "Honored guest, the Queen awaits you for dinner. Please, follow me." The dining hall was smaller than Minho expected, intimate rather than grand. A table carved from a single piece of black crystal sat in the center, and Queen Lyrae stood beside it, watching him enter. She wore different robes now, darker and simpler. Without the ceremony and crowds, she seemed somehow more present, more real. "Corporal Han," she said, "please sit. You must have many questions." Minho sat carefully, trying not to break anything. "Yes, Your Majesty. Mostly, I want to know why I'm here. Direct. I appreciate that." The Queen sat across from him. Servants appeared, placing dishes on the table before vanishing again. "Tell me, Corporal, what did you do during the war?" "I'm a combat engineer. I repaired ships, built fortifications, cleared debris. I did whatever needed doing. Did you see combat? Some. Not much. I was mostly in the rear areas. But you did fight? When I had to, yes. Queen Lyrae picked up a delicate crystal cup. And did you win every battle you fought? Minho blinked at the strange question. No, of course not. Nobody wins every battle. Did you make mistakes? All the time. That's how you learn. And when things went wrong, when your plans failed, what did you do? Adapted. Figured out something else. You can't stop just because something doesn't work. The queen set down her cup and leaned forward slightly. For the first time, Minho saw real emotion in her violet eyes. Something that might have been longing. That, she said quietly, is why you are here. Before Minho could ask what she meant, she stood. Tomorrow I will show you something. Then you will understand. Tonight, eat. Rest. You are safe here, Corporal Han. No matter what you may think, you are exactly where you need to be. She left him alone with the food and his confusion. Minho ate slowly, his mind racing. Nothing made sense. Why would an advanced alien civilization care about mistakes and adaptation? The Stellarum seemed to have perfected everything. After dinner, Minho returned to his quarters and stood at the window, looking out at the glowing forests. In the distance, he could see Stellarum people moving through the city streets. They walked in straight lines, their movements efficient and purposeful. Everything was ordered, everything was perfect, and somehow that perfection felt wrong. It felt empty. Minho thought about his family back on Earth. His mother's chaotic kitchen where she was always trying new recipes that sometimes failed spectacularly. His younger sister's messy room covered with failed art projects and new attempts. His father's workshop full of half-finished repairs and broken tools that would be fixed eventually. It was all so imperfect, so human, and suddenly, Minho missed it with an intensity that surprised him. He touched the watch his grandfather had given him, feeling the scratches on its surface. His grandfather had been an engineer too, and he'd always said the same thing. The best learning comes from fixing what you broke. Whatever the queen wanted from him, whatever she saw in humans that her own perfect people lacked, Minho had a feeling it had something to do with that simple wisdom. The Stellarum had perfected everything, but maybe, just maybe, they'd perfected themselves right into a corner they couldn't escape from. Tomorrow, he would find out. Tonight, he would sleep in a crystal palace on an alien world, with questions circling in his head like stars. Queen Lyrae led Minho through the palace in the morning light. They walked in silence through halls filled with artwork that was technically perfect, but somehow lacked soul. Every sculpture was flawless. Every painting was mathematically balanced. Every piece of music that drifted through the air followed precise patterns. It was all beautiful, but it all felt the same. They stopped before a massive door carved with intricate symbols. The queen placed her hand against it, and the door opened onto a vast circular room. The walls were covered in screens showing what looked like historical records, images of Stellarum people from different eras, their cities, their achievements. "This is the archive of memory," the queen said softly. "Every important moment in our history is preserved here. Come, I want to show you something." She walked to a control panel, and the screens changed. They showed Stellarum people from what must have been thousands of years ago. They looked different, more chaotic in their movements. In one image, two Stellarum were clearly arguing, their faces showing anger. In another, a Stellarum artist was painting, and the work was messy, unfinished, full of bold strokes and mistakes. "This was us 10,000 years ago," the queen said. "We were imperfect then. We fought wars among ourselves. We created art that sometimes failed. We built things that fell apart. We made mistakes constantly." She touched the panel again. The images changed. showing the slow transformation of her people. Then we decided we had suffered enough. Our greatest scientists worked for generations to perfect us. They eliminated the genes that caused aggression. They enhanced our intelligence, our coordination, our ability to process information. They gave us longer lives, perfect health, and the ability to control our emotions completely. "Sounds amazing," Minho said, though something in his chest felt tight as he watched. "It was," the Queen agreed. "For a time. Look." The screen showed Stellarum society advancing rapidly. Their technology exploded forward. They built incredible cities, created wonders, spread across their solar system and beyond. But then, slowly, the images started to look similar. A city from 5,000 years ago looked almost identical to a city from 1,000 years ago. The art stopped changing. The music became formulaic. "We perfected ourselves right into stagnation," the Queen said, and for the first time Minho heard real pain in her voice. "We haven't created truly new art in 3,000 years. Our technology improves only incrementally now. When was the last time a Stellarum composer created something that made people weep? When did a painter make something that spoke to the soul rather than the mind?" She turned to face him, and her violet eyes were filled with an emotion that looked almost like desperation. "During the war, I watched your people. The human forces were disorganized, inefficient, constantly making mistakes. Your equipment broke down. Your plans failed. You argued with each other, questioned orders, improvised in ways that made no logical sense." "We're not very advanced," Minho said quietly. "No," the Queen agreed. "But you're alive, truly alive. I watched human soldiers sing songs after losing a battle. I saw engineers jury-rig repairs that shouldn't have worked but somehow did. I heard stories of humans who sacrificed efficiency for friendship, who made art in the middle of war, who laughed even when facing death." She walked to the window, looking out over her perfect city. "The Void Swarm nearly destroyed us because we couldn't adapt. When they changed tactics, we froze. We had no protocol for dealing with chaos. It was only when we allied with younger species, messy species like yours, that we found a way to fight back." Minho began to understand. "You want to learn how to be imperfect again? More than that. I want to save my people from the perfection that is slowly killing us." The Queen turned back to him. "I studied the humans carefully during the war. I needed someone who wasn't a leader or a genius. I needed someone ordinary, someone who embodied what makes humans special. You fix things, Corporal Han. You take broken things and make them work again, not perfectly, but well enough. That is the skill my people have forgotten." "I don't understand," Minho said. "What can I possibly teach you? Your technology is thousands of years ahead of ours." "Technology means nothing without the ability to grow." The Queen moved closer to him. "I want you to introduce controlled chaos into Stellarum society. Teach us how to fail. Show us how to create without perfection. Help us remember what it feels like to struggle, to overcome, to adapt." Minho laughed. He couldn't help it. "Your Majesty, I'm just a corporal. I'm not a teacher or a philosopher. I barely passed my exams back home." "Exactly," the Queen said, and she smiled. It was the first genuine smile he'd seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. "You don't need to be perfect to show us how to live imperfectly. That's the entire point." Lywin entered the room, bowing to the Queen. "Your Majesty, the High Council requests an audience." "Let them wait," the Queen said, not taking her eyes off Minho. "Corporal Han needs time to think." But Minho's mind was already racing. He thought about his sister, who failed at art projects 10 times before creating something beautiful. He thought about his mother's cooking experiments, half of which were disasters but led to amazing new recipes. He thought about all the times he'd had to improvise repairs with the wrong parts, and somehow made things work. "If I do this," he said slowly. If I try to help your people, where would I even start? How do you teach perfection to be imperfect? The Queen considered this. There are children in the palace school. They have never been allowed to fail at anything. Perhaps you could start there? What would I teach them? Whatever you think they need. I am giving you complete freedom, Corporal Han. For 1 year, you will be my guest and my teacher. The palace and its resources are yours to use. I ask only that you try. Minho looked at the screens again, showing the long, slow decline of Stellarim creativity. He thought about what it must be like to live in a society so perfect that nothing ever changed, nothing ever surprised you, nothing ever made you feel truly challenged or alive. Okay, he said. I'll try, but I'm going to make mistakes. A lot of them. Good, the Queen said. That's exactly what we need. Over the next few days, Minho met with teachers at the palace school. They were polite but clearly skeptical. What could a primitive human teach Stellarim children who could calculate complex mathematics in their heads and spoke 6 languages fluently by age 5? Minho decided to start simple. He asked for a room, some basic art supplies, and a group of 10 children between the ages of 8 and 12 in human years. When the children arrived, they sat in perfect rows, their backs straight, their hands folded. They looked at him with curious violet eyes, but said nothing until he asked them a question. Has anyone here ever painted a picture? Minho asked. Every hand went up. Has anyone ever painted a bad picture? The hands slowly went down. The children looked confused. I don't understand the question, a girl in the front row said. If we paint, we follow the principles of color theory and composition. The result is determined by the application of those principles. Minho smiled. What's your name? Kairos. Okay, Kairos. I want everyone to paint something for me. But here's the rule. It has to be messy. It has to break the rules. I want you to paint something wrong. The children stared at him like he'd just spoken in an alien language. In a way, he had. For the next hour, Minho watched as 10 perfectly trained Stellarim children struggled with the simple task of making bad art. They would start to paint, then stop, unable to force themselves to create something imperfect. Finally, Kairos began to cry. Tears rolled down her silver-blue cheeks as she stared at her blank canvas. I can't do it. I don't know how to do it wrong. Minho knelt beside her. Then don't try to do it wrong. Just do it without thinking about right or wrong. Paint what you feel, not what you know. Kairos looked at him, her eyes wide. Then slowly she picked up a brush. She made a single red stroke across the canvas. It was crooked, uneven, and completely unplanned. She gasped. Then she made another stroke, and another. Soon she was painting wildly, mixing colors that shouldn't work, making shapes that followed no pattern. The other children watched in amazement. And when Kairos finally stepped back, looking at her chaotic, messy, imperfect painting, she was smiling through her tears. It's terrible, she whispered. It's alive, Minho said. That night, Queen Lyrae came to see him in his quarters. The teachers tell me you made one of the children cry today. Yes, Minho admitted, but she was also happy. Both at the same time. The Queen was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, We have forgotten that happiness and sadness can exist together, that success and failure are not opposites but partners. Show us more, Corporal Han. Show us everything we've lost. As she left, Minho looked out at the glowing forests and wondered if he was really ready for this impossible task. But then he thought of Kairos's smile, of the pure joy in creating something imperfect. Maybe the Queen was right. Maybe being ordinary, being human, was exactly what the Stellarim needed, and maybe, just maybe, he could help them remember what it meant to truly live. 3 months passed on Luminara, and Minho's small experiments began to spread throughout the palace. Word of the crying child who smiled while painting had reached other parents, and soon Minho found himself with more students than he could handle. He taught them to build things that might fall down. He taught them games where winning wasn't guaranteed. He taught them to ask questions that had no perfect answers. But it was the cooking lesson that changed everything. Minho stood in the palace kitchen, watching 5 Stellarim cooks work with mechanical precision. Every measurement was exact. Every temperature was calculated to the degree. Every dish came out identical to the last time it was made, which might have been yesterday or 100 years ago. "Has anyone here ever ruined a meal?" Minho asked. The head cook, a tall Stellarim named Horin, looked genuinely confused. "Ruined? Our meals are calculated based on optimal nutrition and flavor profiles. Error is not possible if one follows the formula. But what if you didn't follow the formula? What if you just tried something new? That would be illogical. The formulas are proven." Minho smiled. "Okay, new rule for today. Everyone cooks something without measuring. No scales, no timers, no formulas, just feel." The cooks looked at each other with something close to panic. Finally, Horin said, "I do not understand what you mean by feel. How does one feel the correct amount of spice?" "You taste it and decide if you want more. You smell it and trust your instinct. You make it up as you go." The next 2 hours were chaotic. Flour covered the floors. Sauces boiled over. One cook accidentally created something that smoked so badly they had to open all the windows. But slowly, something changed. The cooks stopped asking Minho for instructions. They started experimenting, mixing things that shouldn't go together, adjusting based on nothing but their own judgment. When they finally sat down to eat their creations, most of the food was terrible. Oversalted, undercooked, or just plain strange. But one of the younger cooks, Binna, had made something interesting. It wasn't perfect. The sauce was too thick and the vegetables weren't cut evenly. But it had flavor, real flavor, different from anything they'd tasted before. "This is awful," Binna said, but she was laughing. Actually laughing, a sound so rare among the Stellarim that the others stopped eating to stare at her. "It's different," Minho corrected. "And different means you're learning." That evening, the cooks served the queen a meal that wasn't from any formula. She ate slowly, tasting each element. When she finished, she called Minho to her private dining room. "This meal was imperfect," she said. Minho's heart sank. "Yes, Your Majesty." "It was also the most interesting thing I've eaten in a century." She stood and walked to the window. "The High Council is growing concerned about your influence. They say you're disrupting our social order. Children are questioning their teachers. Workers are experimenting instead of following procedures. Some council members want to end your stay early." "Do you want me to stop?" Minho asked quietly. The queen turned to face him. "No, I want you to do more. But we need to be careful. The council won't move against me directly, but they will look for any excuse to prove that chaos is dangerous." She was right to worry. 2 weeks later, Minho introduced basketball to a group of young Stellarim adults. He'd had to explain the rules 5 times because they kept asking about the optimal strategy for winning. Finally, he just threw them the ball and told them to play. The first game was a disaster. No one knew what to do. They stood in neat lines, passing the ball with mechanical precision, but no understanding of the game's flow. Then Minho changed the rules. Every 5 minutes, he would shout out a new rule. Now you have to hop on 1 foot. Now you can only pass backwards. Now the basket is worth different points. The Stellarim players were forced to adapt constantly. They couldn't rely on learned patterns. They had to react, improvise, think on their feet. And slowly, something amazing happened. They started to enjoy it, not because they were winning, but because they were being challenged in a way they'd never experienced before. A young man named Tayo became particularly good at adapting. He started anticipating the rule changes, staying flexible, reading the game instead of just playing it. When Minho finally ended the session, Tayo approached him. "I have never felt this way before," Tayo said. "Tired, frustrated, but also excited. My heart is beating fast even though I'm not in danger. What is this feeling?" "It's called being alive," Minho said. "Real living isn't about being comfortable all the time. It's about being challenged." But not everyone appreciated the changes. Chancellor Veyron, the head of the High Council, summoned Minho to a formal meeting. The Chancellor was older than most Stellarum Minho had met, with skin that had faded to almost pure silver. "Corporal Han," Veyron said, his voice cold, "I want to understand your purpose here. The Queen says you are teaching us adaptation, but what I see is disruption. Our society has been stable for millennia. Why should we risk that stability for your experiments?" "Because stability without growth is stagnation," Minho replied, trying to keep his voice respectful. "Your people are brilliant, but you've stopped evolving. You've stopped creating anything new." "We create constantly. Our engineers improve our technology every year. Incremental improvements to existing designs. When was the last time one of your people invented something completely new, something no one had ever imagined before?" Veyron was silent for a long moment. "Such innovations are rare and often dangerous. We prefer measured progress." "But what happens when you face something unexpected? Something that doesn't fit your protocols? The Void Swarm nearly destroyed you because you couldn't adapt fast enough." "We survived," Veyron said coldly. "And we will survive long after your year here is finished. I am watching you, Corporal Han. If your chaos causes any real harm, I will end this experiment regardless of the Queen's wishes." As Minho left the council chambers, he felt the weight of the Chancellor's warning. He was walking a dangerous line. Push too hard, and he'd be sent home in disgrace. Push too gently, and nothing would really change. That night, he sat with Queen Liray in her private garden, one of the few places in the palace that looked slightly wild. Real plants grew here, not the engineered perfection found elsewhere. "Veyron threatened me today," Minho said. "I know. He informed me immediately after." The Queen plucked a flower, examining its petals. "He's afraid. They're all afraid. Change is terrifying when you've been perfect for so long." "Maybe he's right to be afraid. What if I'm doing more harm than good?" The Queen looked at him sharply. "Do you believe that?" Minho thought about Kiris's painting, about Binna's laughter in the kitchen, about Tayo's excitement after the game. "No. I think your people are hungry for this, even if they don't know it yet." "Then continue. But perhaps we need to show the Council something concrete, something that proves adaptation isn't just about art and games." 3 days later, Minho got his chance. A mining facility on one of Luminara's moons reported a critical failure in their primary extraction system. The backup systems were offline, and by protocol, work had to stop until specialized engineers could arrive from the capital, which would take days. "Let me go," Minho said when he heard about it. "Let me show them what improvisation can do." The Queen arranged for a fast ship. When Minho arrived at the mining facility, the Stellarum workers were standing around the broken machinery, waiting patiently for the experts to arrive. The facility manager, Dela, showed him the problem. "The primary coolant system has failed," she explained. "Without it, the extractors will overheat and could cause a catastrophic explosion. We must wait for the proper parts and engineers. Or," Minho said, examining the system, "we could improvise a temporary coolant system using what you have here." "Improvise?" Dela looked horrified. "That's not in our safety protocols." "I know, but I'm human. We improvise all the time. Trust me." For the next 6 hours, Minho worked with a team of increasingly amazed Stellarum workers. He showed them how to reroute cooling pipes from a non-essential system. He taught them to modify pumps to work in ways they weren't designed for. He demonstrated how to test and adjust on the fly, making small changes until everything worked well enough. It wasn't perfect. It was jury-rigged, patched together, held in place with temporary fixes. But when they powered up the extractors, they ran smoothly. The temporary system would hold until the proper parts arrived. The workers stared at the running machinery like it was a miracle. Dela turned to Minho, her violet eyes wide. You fixed it with broken protocols and improvised solutions. According to our training, this should not work. But it does work, Minho said. That's the point. Sometimes good enough is better than perfect, especially when perfect takes too long. When they returned to the palace, Queen Lyrae was waiting with news. The Chancellor has called an emergency council session. They want to hear your report about the mining facility. This is your chance, Corporal Han. Show them that adaptation isn't just chaos. Show them it's survival. Minho looked at his hands, still dirty from the repair work. In 6 months, he'd gone from a confused soldier to a teacher of imperfection. He'd made Stellarum children cry and laugh. He'd ruined meals and fixed broken machines. He'd introduced chaos into the most orderly society in the galaxy, and somehow, against all odds, it was working. The question was, would the High Council see it as progress or as a threat? Tomorrow, he would find out. The emergency council session never happened. 3 days before it was scheduled, alarms began screaming throughout the palace. Minho was in the gardens with Kairos, who was now teaching other children how to paint imperfectly, when Lywin came running toward them. Corporal Han, the Queen requires your presence immediately. We're under attack. Minho's military training kicked in instantly. He followed Lywin to the command center, a vast room filled with holographic displays showing space around Luminera. Queen Lyrae stood at the center, surrounded by military officers, and her face was grim. Raiders, she said without preamble. A group calling themselves the Breakers. They've been hitting border colonies for months, but we thought they were just scavengers. Now they're attacking our mining operations in the outer system, and our forces can't stop them. Minho studied the displays. The raiders' ships moved in erratic patterns, never staying in one place, never following predictable routes. The Stellarum defense fleet kept trying to intercept them, but the raiders would suddenly change direction or split up, causing the perfectly coordinated Stellarum formations to hesitate. Why can't your ships adapt to their tactics? Minho asked. Commander Celix, a tall Stellarum woman with silver hair, turned to him sharply. We are adapting. We've run 17,000 tactical simulations and selected the optimal response pattern. But they're not following any pattern, so your optimal response doesn't work. That is illogical. All military action follows some pattern, even if chaotic. We simply haven't found it yet. Minho watched as another Stellarum squadron was led into a trap. The raiders had pretended to flee, and the Stellarum ships followed in perfect formation, only to be ambushed from 3 sides. The Stellarum ships survived but took heavy damage before retreating. Your Majesty, Minho said carefully, I think I see the problem. Your forces are too perfect. They move like a machine, which makes them predictable. The raiders know you'll always choose the most logical response, so they create situations where the logical response is a trap. Then what do you suggest? The Queen asked. Let me train your commanders. Not in tactics, but in improvisation. Teach them to be unpredictable. To make choices that don't make perfect sense but might work anyway. Chancellor Veyron, who had been watching silently, spoke up. Absolutely not. This human has been here less than a year, and you want to put our military strategy in his hands? These raiders are a minor nuisance. We will defeat them with proper analysis and coordination. How many ships have we lost while you've been analyzing? The Queen snapped. How many colonies have been damaged? Acceptable losses while we formulate the correct response. There are no acceptable losses of my people's lives." For the first time since Minho met her, the Queen's perfect control cracked. Her voice rose with real anger. "Chancellor, you have 48 hours to stop these raiders using your methods. If you fail, Corporal Han will train our forces his way." The Chancellor's face showed no emotion, but his eyes were cold. "As you command, Your Majesty." For 2 days, Minho watched as the Stellarum military tried everything their simulation suggested. The raiders kept winning. They were losing ships, but the Stellarum were losing more, and the raids were getting bolder, moving closer to inhabited worlds. On the morning of the 3rd day, the Queen called him back to the command center. "The Chancellor has admitted his approach isn't working. You have permission to train our forces. But understand, if you fail, Veyron will use this as proof that your entire presence here has been a disaster. He'll demand your immediate removal and a return to our old ways." "I understand," Minho said. "When do I start?" "Now." Commander Celix was not happy about taking orders from a human corporal. She made that clear when Minho entered the training facility where she waited with her top squadron leaders. "Corporal Han," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "I have served in the Stellarum Defense Force for 217 years. I have never lost a battle through proper planning and execution. What exactly do you think you can teach me?" "How to fail," Minho said simply. The room went silent. Finally, Celix said, "Explain." "You've never lost a battle because you've only fought enemies who were predictable. The raiders aren't predictable, so all your experience means nothing. You need to learn how to think like them, how to be chaotic and random and illogical. That is contradictory to everything we've learned." "I know. That's why I'm here." Minho pulled up a star map. "I'm going to run a simulation. I want your best squadron to intercept a target. But here's the rule. I'm going to control the target, and I'm going to do everything wrong. Every choice I make will be tactically stupid. Your job is to catch me anyway." "This will be simple," Celix said confidently. It wasn't simple. Minho had the target ship do things that made no sense. It ran toward danger instead of away. It split up when it should have stayed together. It hid in places that offered no tactical advantage, and because none of it made sense, Celix's perfectly trained instincts kept leading her into mistakes. After the 3rd failed simulation, Celix stared at the display in frustration. "I predicted your moves correctly. You went to the worst possible positions. But every time we moved to intercept, you did something even more illogical." "Exactly. You're thinking 3 steps ahead, but I'm not thinking ahead at all. I'm just reacting. That's what the raiders are doing. They're not following a plan, they're just doing whatever feels right in the moment." "How do we counter that?" "By learning to do it ourselves. Stop planning everything. Start trusting your gut." "I don't understand what that means." Minho thought for a moment. "When you paint a picture, do you follow a formula?" Celix looked confused. "I have never painted a picture." "Never?" Minho was shocked. "In 200 years? It is not my skill set. I am a military officer." "Okay, new exercise. Everyone here is going to learn to paint. Right now." The commanders looked at each other in confusion as Minho had supplies brought to the training room. For the next hour, he taught 15 senior military officers how to throw paint at canvases without thinking, how to make choices based on feeling rather than logic, how to create without planning. They were terrible at it, but slowly, Minho saw something change in their eyes. They started to understand that not every action needed to be calculated, that sometimes doing something for no reason at all was its own kind of strategy. When they returned to the combat simulations, the results were different. Celix still struggled, her 2 centuries of training fighting against her attempts to be random. But some of the younger officers started getting it. They would make a choice, realize it was stupid, and do it anyway. And sometimes, those stupid choices worked. After a week of intense training, the Queen authorized them to engage the raiders. Minho wasn't allowed to go with them since he had no combat ship qualifications, but he watched from the command center as Celix led her squadron into battle. The first engagement was messy. Celix tried to improvise but kept falling back on her training. The raiders slipped away, but then one of her wing leaders, a young officer named Juan, did something completely unexpected. Instead of pursuing the fleeing raiders, he positioned his ships to look vulnerable, like easy targets. The raiders, seeing what looked like damaged ships, changed direction to attack. It was a trap, but not a logical one. Juan had simply guessed that the raiders might be greedy enough to take a risk. When they committed to the attack, the rest of the Stellarim squadron came in from an unexpected angle. The raiders broke off, but now they were confused. The Stellarim weren't acting like they usually did. The battle became chaotic, with both sides making choices that didn't follow any obvious pattern. But the Stellarim had better ships and more training. When both sides abandoned logic, the superior technology and skill began to matter. The raiders retreated, having lost 2 ships without destroying any Stellarim vessels. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was progress. Commander Celix returned to the palace that evening and found Minho in the gardens. She sat down beside him, looking exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I have studied warfare for 2 centuries, she said quietly. Today, I threw away everything I learned and followed the advice of a human who has been a soldier for less than a decade. And it worked. Not because my way is better, Minho said, but because it's different. Your training is still valuable. You just needed to learn when to ignore it. I failed 3 times in those simulations you ran. 3 times in 1 week. Before you came, I had not failed in 50 years. How does that feel?" Celix was quiet for a long moment. "Terrible," she finally said, "but also strangely exciting. I am learning again. I had forgotten what that felt like." Over the next month, the pattern continued. The Stellarim forces engaged the raiders again and again. Sometimes they won, sometimes they lost, but each time they got better at adapting, at being unpredictable, at trusting their instincts over their calculations. The breakthrough came when Commander Celix finally let go completely. She was leading an attack on the raiders' hidden base when everything went wrong. The base had more defenses than intelligence suggested. Her carefully planned assault fell apart in the first minute. Old Celix would have retreated to regroup and plan. New Celix made a split-second decision that made no tactical sense. She ordered her ships to scatter, to attack from random directions with no coordination. It looked like chaos. It was chaos. But the raider defenses were designed to counter coordinated attacks. Against pure randomness, they didn't know how to respond. The Stellarim won. They destroyed the base and captured most of the raiders. When Celix returned, she came directly to Minho. "I did everything wrong," she said. "I abandoned formation, ignored my own battle plan, and made choices based on instinct rather than analysis." "And?" Minho asked. For the first time, Commander Celix smiled. It was small, uncertain, but genuine. "And we won, not elegantly, not perfectly, but we won." That night, Queen Lyrae hosted a celebration. The palace was filled with officers and pilots, and for the first time since Minho arrived, he saw Stellarim people acting loose and relaxed. They were talking about the battle, arguing about tactics, laughing at mistakes they'd made. The Queen found him on a balcony, looking out at the glowing forests. "The Chancellor is very quiet tonight," she said. "He cannot argue with success." "But he's still watching," Minho replied, "waiting for me to fail." "Then we must not fail." She stood beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "You have 9 weeks left with us, Corporal Hahn. In that time, you have changed my people more than anyone has in millennia. I want you to know that whatever happens, I am grateful you came." Minho looked at her. this perfect alien queen who had brought him across the galaxy to teach her people how to be imperfect. Somewhere along the way, she had become less alien to him, less distant. He pushed the thought away. He was here for a job, nothing more. But as they stood together watching the stars, Minho couldn't help wondering what would happen when his year was up and it was time to go home. The summons came exactly 6 weeks before Minho's year was scheduled to end. A formal notice delivered to his quarters by a council messenger. The Galactic Council was reconvening to hear a petition from Chancellor Veyron. The charge was cultural destabilization. The defendant was Corporal Han Minho. Queen Lyra came to his quarters that evening, her face troubled. I knew Veyron would try something, but I didn't expect him to go to the Galactic Council. This is bigger than I anticipated. What happens if they rule against me? Minho asked. You would be removed immediately and sent back to Earth. The Council could also sanction me for bringing you here. Worse, they could declare that human cultural influence is dangerous to other species. It would set back Earth's position in the galaxy by decades. Minho felt his stomach sink. He'd known his work was controversial, but he hadn't realized the stakes were this high. Then I'll defend myself. I'll explain what we've accomplished. It won't be easy. The Council values stability above all else. Veyron will present evidence of every disruption you've caused, and there's been plenty. She was right. Over the past months, Stellarim society had changed dramatically. The crime rate had increased from 0 to a tiny fraction of a percent, mostly minor disputes and rule-breaking. Efficiency in some sectors had dropped. Traditional hierarchies were being questioned. Children were arguing with teachers. Workers were experimenting instead of following procedures. To a council that had watched civilizations rise and fall for millions of years, it probably looked like the beginning of a collapse. The trial was held in the same grand chamber where Minho had first been chosen. This time he stood alone in the center, while the delegates looked down from their curved rows. Chancellor Veyron presented the case against him with cold precision. Honored delegates, Veyron began, I come before you with grave concerns about the human influence on Stellarim society. When Corporal Han arrived, we were a stable civilization with near-zero crime, maximum efficiency, and perfect social harmony. Observe what has happened in just 10 months. Holographic displays filled the air. Statistics showed increases in disputes, decreases in productivity, and rises in unpredictable behavior. Videos showed Stellarim children painting messy pictures, adults laughing at failed cooking attempts, and Commander Celix's chaotic attack on the raider base. This is what the human calls teaching, Veyron said. I call it corruption. We perfected ourselves over millennia to eliminate exactly this kind of chaos. Corporal Han has undone thousands of years of progress in less than 1 year. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Many delegates nodded in agreement. The Talaxian representative, the same being who had questioned the Queen's choice at the beginning, spoke up. The Stellarim were once our models of civilization. Now we see them behaving like primitive species, making irrational choices and celebrating failure. If this is what human influence brings, perhaps we should reconsider Earth's membership in this council. Ambassador Park stood from the human delegation, his face pale. We had no intention of causing harm. Corporal Han was chosen by Queen Lyra herself. A choice she now regrets, I'm certain, Veyron said smoothly. No. The single word cut through the chamber. Queen Lyra rose from her seat, and every eye turned to her. She descended from the Stellarim section and walked to stand beside Minho in the center of the chamber. I do not regret my choice, she said clearly. Chancellor Veyron presents these changes as damage. I present them as healing. Your Majesty, the council speaker said carefully. You are entitled to defend your guest, but the evidence is concerning. Then let me present my own evidence, The Queen gestured, and new displays appeared. Chancellor Veyron showed you statistics. Let me show you people. The first image was Kairos, the girl who had cried while painting. But now the display showed her recent work, a series of paintings that were technically imperfect, but emotionally powerful. This child discovered she could create art that moved others. Something no Stellarim has done in 3,000 years. The next image showed the palace kitchen staff. These cooks rediscovered joy in their work. They now create meals that surprise and delight, rather than merely sustaining. More images followed. Commander Celix speaking passionately about tactics to her officers. Scientists proposing wild new theories instead of incremental improvements to old ones. Artists creating music that made people feel instead of just think. You call this corruption, the Queen said. I call it rebirth. Yes, our efficiency has dropped slightly. Yes, we have disputes now, but we also have innovation again. We have growth. We have life. You have instability, Veyron countered. And instability leads to chaos, which leads to destruction. The Stellarim learned this lesson millennia ago. Why must we learn it again? Because we forgot something important while learning that lesson, the Queen replied. We forgot how to change. When the Void Swarm attacked, we nearly died because we couldn't adapt. Corporal Han didn't teach us chaos. He taught us flexibility. The council speaker raised a crystalline hand. These are philosophical arguments. We need practical evidence. Corporal Han, you have the right to defend yourself. What do you say to these charges? Minho stepped forward. He'd been dreading this moment, standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, trying to explain why making people fail was actually helping them. His mouth was dry, and his heart hammered in his chest. Honored delegates, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I'm not a diplomat or a philosopher. I'm just a soldier who fixes things. When I came here, I thought the Stellarim were perfect. Their technology, their society, their people, everything looked flawless. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But perfection isn't the same as being alive. A perfect machine doesn't grow. It just runs until it breaks down. The Stellarim weren't breaking down exactly, but they weren't growing either. They'd been the same for thousands of years. Stability is valuable, the Talaxian delegate interjected. Yes, Minho agreed. But so is change. On Earth, we have a saying, if you're not growing, you're dying. Maybe we're not as advanced as you. Maybe we make a lot of mistakes. But we keep learning, keep changing, keep trying new things. That's what makes us strong. He gestured to the displays still showing Stellarim people engaged in various activities. I didn't corrupt these people. I reminded them of something they'd forgotten. That it's okay to fail. That mistakes are how you learn. That being imperfect is part of being alive. Pretty words, Veyron said coldly. But they don't address the damage you've caused to our social order. Actually, they do. A new voice joined the conversation. Minho turned to see Kairos walking into the center of the chamber. She was young, barely into her teenage years by Stellarim standards, but she walked with confidence. Young one, the council speaker said gently, this is not a place for children. I'm not here as a child, Kairos said. I'm here as someone whose life was changed by Corporal Han's teaching. She looked up at the thousands of delegates. Before he came, I was perfect. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect everything. And I was miserable. She pulled out a small device and projected an image into the air. It was her first painting, the messy, chaotic one that had made her cry. This is the first thing I ever created that was truly mine, not following a formula or copying a style, just me, expressing what I felt. And when I made it, I cried. We saw that in Chancellor Veyron's evidence, someone said. He used you crying as proof of harm. I cried because I was happy, Kairos said. For the first time in my life, I felt something real, something deep, something that wasn't calculated or predicted or controlled. She looked at Minho. He didn't hurt me. He woke me up. She touched the device again, and music filled the chamber. It was strange, beautiful, with unexpected harmonies and rhythms that didn't follow perfect mathematical patterns. Many of the delegates leaned forward, listening intently. I composed this last week, Kira said. It's not perfect. Some of the transitions are rough, some of the notes clash, but it's honest, and it makes people feel things. She looked around the chamber. Isn't that what art is supposed to do? The music faded, and several delegates were wiping their eyes. The council speaker's crystalline form seemed to shimmer with emotion. That was remarkable, the speaker said softly. I have not been moved by art in a very long time. Chancellor Veyron stepped forward, his face still showing no emotion. This is exactly my point. The child is displaying uncontrolled emotional responses. She's creating art that follows no proven principles. This is chaos masquerading as culture. Or, Commander Celix said, striding into the center to join them, it's evolution. She bowed to the council. I am Commander Celix of the Stellarum Defense Force. 217 years of service, perfect record, never lost a battle through proper planning. And I was useless against the raiders until Corporal Han taught me how to fail. She gestured, and new tactical displays appeared. These are the battle records. Before Corporal Han's training, we lost every engagement. After, we started winning. Not through better planning, but through better adaptation. He didn't make us weaker. He made us stronger. The council speaker looked at Chancellor Veyron. It seems the evidence is not as clear as you suggested. They are victims of his influence, Veyron insisted. They cannot see the damage objectively. Then perhaps we should hear from someone less influenced, the Queen said. She gestured to the human delegation. Ambassador Park, your people have been imperfect for your entire history. Has this imperfection destroyed you? Ambassador Park stood, looking surprised to be called. Well, no. We've had wars, conflicts, failures, but we've also had incredible growth. Every generation finds new ways to solve old problems. Our messiness might look chaotic, but it served us well. The debate continued for hours. Delegates argued back and forth, some supporting Veyron's concern about instability, others fascinated by the changes in Stellarum society. Finally, the council speaker called for order. We will vote. The question is simple. Should Corporal Han Minho be allowed to complete his year with the Stellarum, or should he be removed immediately for cultural destabilization? The vote took only minutes. When it was done, the speaker announced the result. The council rules in favor of Corporal Han. He may complete his term. However, we issue a warning to the Stellarum Empire. You must demonstrate that you can balance these changes with your social stability. We will monitor the situation closely. Chancellor Veyron's face remained neutral, but his eyes were cold as ice. As the council commands. But remember, Your Majesty, chaos is easier to start than to stop. I hope you can control what you've unleashed. As the chamber emptied, Minho stood with the Queen, Kairos, and Commander Celix. He felt drained, exhausted, but also relieved. He could finish his year. He could complete what he'd started. Thank you for speaking for me, he said to Kairos and Celix. You gave me my voice back, Kairos said. Of course I would use it to defend you. You taught me to think differently, Celix added. That saved my life and the lives of my crews. I owed you the truth. The Queen was quiet, staring out at the stars visible through the chamber's windows. Finally, she said, Veyron is right about one thing. What we've started cannot be stopped now. My people are changing. In 9 weeks, you will leave, and I will have to guide them through these changes alone. She turned to Minho, and for the first time, he saw real uncertainty in her eyes. I hope I am ready for this. You are, Minho said, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. You're the one who had the courage to start this in the first place. But as they left the chamber, Minho felt a weight settling on his shoulders. In 9 weeks, he would go home. And whatever happened to the Stellarum after that, for better or worse, would be partly his responsibility. 3 weeks before Minho was scheduled to return to Earth, the alarms screamed again, but this time they were different, louder, more urgent, carrying a note of genuine panic that cut through the palace like a knife. Minho ran to the command center where chaos had replaced the usual ordered calm. Officers shouted reports, displays flashed red warnings, and at the center of it all stood Queen Lyrae, her face pale even for a Stellarim. "What's happening?" Minho demanded. "Void swarm," Commander Celix said, her voice tight. "A massive remnant force, much larger than anything we faced during the war. They were dormant in deep space, and now they're heading directly for Luminara." The holographic display showed it clearly. Thousands of swarm ships, dark and insectoid, moving in their characteristic pattern that was part calculation, part organic instinct. The same enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 3 years ago. They'd thought the swarm was defeated, but this force had been hiding, waiting, growing. "How long until they reach us?" the Queen asked. 4 days at their current speed. The Galactic Council's fleets are responding, but they're at least 6 days away. We're alone. Minho studied the display, his mind racing. 4 days. The Stellarum Defense Force was strong, but they'd struggled against unpredictable raiders. The Void Swarm was something else entirely, an enemy that combined insect-like coordination with alien adaptability. "We need to evacuate the planet," Chancellor Veyron said from his position at the council table. "The civilians, at least. There's no way we can hold against this force." "Evacuation would take a week," Celix replied. "We don't have time." "Then we do what we can and accept the losses." "No." Queen Lyrae's voice cut through the argument. "We don't accept any losses. We fight." "Your Majesty, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. We have the best military in this sector. We have defenses. And we have something the swarm hasn't encountered before." She looked at Minho. "We have adaptation." Over the next 24 hours, Minho worked with Commander Celix and her officers to plan a defense. But planning wasn't really the right word. They were creating a framework for organized chaos, a battle strategy that was designed to be changed on the fly. "The swarm learns," Minho explained to the assembled commanders. "They adapt to whatever tactics you use against them, so we can't use any tactic for too long. We need to keep shifting, keep them off balance, never let them figure out what we're doing." "That contradicts every principle of military coordination," one officer protested. "I know," Minho said. "That's the point." A communication came in from Earth's Defense Force. Captain Li Jun, Minho's old commanding officer, appeared on the screen. She looked older than Minho remembered, her face lined with worry. "Corporal Han, we've been monitoring the situation. We're sending every ship we can spare. It's not much, but we don't abandon our people." "Thank you, Captain," Minho said, feeling a surge of emotion. "How many ships?" 23. We'll arrive in 3.5 days. "Can you hold until then?" "We'll have to." The human ships weren't the only ones coming. Species from across the sector, many of whom had benefited from Stellarim aid during the Void War, sent what forces they could. It still wouldn't be enough, but it was something. The Queen called a meeting of all defense personnel. Stellarum soldiers, pilots, engineers, and civilians who had volunteered to help filled the massive hall. She stood before them, and when she spoke, her voice carried to every corner. 3 years ago, we fought the Void Swarm and thought we won. Now they return, and they come for our home. But we are not the same people who fought that war." She gestured to Minho, standing beside her. "This human has taught us something our ancestors forgot. That perfection is not the same as strength. That adaptation is not chaos, but survival. She looked out at her people. Today I ask you to fight imperfectly, to improvise, to trust each other and yourselves, to be flexible instead of rigid, creative instead of calculated. Can you do this? The response was not the perfect unified affirmation Minho had seen from Stellarum crowds before. It was messy, emotional, with people shouting different things at different times. But it was real, and it was loud. The Void Swarm arrived exactly on schedule. Their ships blotted out the stars, a dark tide of living metal and alien hunger. The Stellarum fleet met them at the edge of the system, and the battle began. Minho coordinated from the palace, watching dozens of displays showing different parts of the fight. Commander Celix led the main fleet, but she didn't follow a predetermined plan. She reacted, adapted, changed tactics every few minutes. When the swarm tried to surround her ships, she scattered them. When they adapted to the scattered formation, she brought them back together in unexpected ways. It was working, but barely. The swarm was too large, too numerous. Even with the Allied forces that had arrived to help, they were outnumbered 5-1. Ships were taking damage, pilots were dying, and slowly the defense was being pushed back toward Luminara itself. We need something they can't adapt to, Minho muttered, staring at the displays. Something so chaotic that there's nothing to learn from. An idea formed in his mind. It was insane. It went against every principle of military coordination he'd ever learned, but maybe that was exactly what they needed. He opened a channel to all ships, human and Stellarum alike. All forces, this is Corporal Han. I have a crazy idea, and I need you to trust me. Captain June's voice came back immediately. Define crazy. I want everyone to give up on coordination completely. No formations, no battle plans, no predetermined moves. Every ship acts independently, making decisions based only on what they see in front of them. Trust your instincts, trust each other, but don't try to coordinate. There was silence on the channel. Then Commander Celix said, That's suicide. Without coordination, we'll be destroyed. Or the swarm won't be able to predict us because even we don't know what we're doing. They adapt to patterns. Let's give them no pattern to adapt to. It's completely illogical, Celix said. I know. Are you going to do it anyway? Another long silence. Then Celix laughed. Actually laughed on an open military channel during a battle. 6 months ago, I would have said no. Now, let's try it. All Stellarum forces, you heard the human. Independent action, no coordination. Fight like humans. Captain June added, All human forces, fight like ourselves, which apparently means we're showing the aliens how it's done. What happened next was the most chaotic battle in recorded Stellarum history. Every ship moved independently, reacting to threats as they appeared, helping each other without orders, improvising tactics on the fly. Stellarum pilots flew alongside human pilots, and together they created something that looked like complete chaos, but somehow worked. The Void Swarm tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. Every time they analyzed one ship's behavior, that ship did something different. Every time they predicted a pattern, the pattern changed. They were fighting an enemy that had no strategy, no plan, just thousands of individual pilots making split-second decisions. But it still wasn't enough. There were too many swarm ships, and the casualties were mounting. Minho watched ships wink out on the displays, each one representing lives lost, and felt sick. This was his plan, his responsibility. Then Queen Lyrae appeared beside him. I'm going out there. What? No, you're the queen. You can't. I can pilot. I was trained, though I haven't done it in decades, and my people need to see that I'm willing to fight beside them. She touched his shoulder. You taught us to be brave in our imperfection. Let me show you that we learned. Before Minho could protest, she was gone, heading for the royal hangar. Minutes later, her personal fighter launched, a sleek ship marked with royal insignia. She flew directly into the thickest part of the battle, where human and Stellarim forces were holding desperately against a swarm pushed toward the planet. Minho's heart was in his throat as he watched her ship dance through the battle. She wasn't the perfect pilot her training had made her. She made mistakes, took risks, flew in ways that would make any tactical computer scream in protest. But she was adapting, improvising, trusting her instincts. And her people responded. When they saw their queen fighting beside them, taking the same risks, making the same sacrifices, something changed in the Stellarim forces. They fought harder, took bigger chances, pushed themselves beyond what they thought possible. The battle raged for hours. Ships from both sides fell, burning in the black. The space around Luminara became a graveyard of metal and sacrifice. But slowly, incredibly, the tide began to turn. The Void Swarm, for all their adaptability, couldn't adapt to pure chaos. They started making mistakes, spreading their forces thin, trying to counter threats that disappeared before they could respond. And when Captain Jiun led a desperate charge through the swarm's center, breaking their formation, the Queen followed with every Stellarim ship that could still fly. The swarm broke. Without coordination of their own, they scattered, and the combined human Stellarim forces hunted them down. By the time the Galactic Council's reinforcements arrived, the battle was over. The victory had been costly. Dozens of ships destroyed, hundreds of lives lost, and Luminara's orbital stations badly damaged. But they had won. Against impossible odds, they had survived. Minho stood in the hangar when the Queen's ship landed. She climbed out slowly, her royal robes scorched and torn, her silver-blue skin showing bruises from the violent maneuvers her ship had made. But she was smiling, a wide, genuine smile that transformed her face. "We did it," she said, and then she collapsed. The next few days were a blur of recovery efforts. Minho helped coordinate repairs, working alongside Stellarim engineers who now treated him as an equal rather than a curious alien. The human crews integrated seamlessly with the Stellarim, and he watched as friendships formed between species who would have been strangers just a year ago. The Queen recovered quickly from her exhaustion. She insisted on attending every memorial service for the fallen, Stellarim and human alike. And she announced a new program, Permanent Human-Stellarim Military Cooperation, with exchange officers serving on each other's ships. 1 week before Minho's scheduled departure, the Queen invited him to her private gardens. They walked among the flowers that now grew with deliberate wildness, no longer perfectly manicured. "Your year is almost over," she said quietly. "Yes." "The Council is requesting that you stay longer. They've seen what you've accomplished and want other species to benefit from human chaos training, as they're calling it." Minho was surprised. "What did you tell them?" "That the decision is yours." She stopped walking and turned to face him. "I could offer you a position here, permanent ambassador, military advisor, teacher. You could stay on Luminara, help my people continue to grow and change." Minho's heart ached at the offer. Over the past year, Luminara had become a second home. The Stellarim people had become friends, and the Queen had become something more than that, though he'd never quite let himself examine those feelings too closely. "I need to go home," he said finally. "My family, my world, I miss them, and I think the Stellarim don't need me anymore. You've learned what I came to teach." The Queen nodded, though something flickered in her eyes. "I understand, but know that you will always have a place here if you choose to return." They walked in silence for a while. Then the Queen said, "I have something for you." She led him to a small building he'd never seen before, hidden in the deepest part of the gardens. Inside was a crystal sculpture, taller than a person. It showed a human figure, clearly meant to be Minho, holding a broken piece of crystal that was being reformed by light flowing from his hands. "This will stand in the palace plaza," the queen said, "with an inscription. He taught us that to be alive is to be imperfect." Minho stared at the statue, overwhelmed. "I don't deserve this. You changed an entire civilization. I think you deserve more than we can ever give you." On his last day, the palace was filled with people who came to say goodbye. Kiris, now leading an entire school of young artists, learning to embrace imperfection. The palace kitchen staff, who presented him with a meal that was deliberately experimental and delicious. Commander Celix, who saluted him with genuine respect. Tayo and the other athletes who'd learned to play basketball. Hundreds of Stellarim whose lives he'd touched in small ways. Captain June was there too, waiting to take him back to Earth on her ship. "Ready to go home, Corporal?" "Actually," Minho said, "I think I've earned a promotion. It's been a year since I left." June grinned. "Fair enough. Sergeant Han it is." The Queen walked him to the ship. At the boarding ramp, they stood facing each other, and Minho didn't know what to say. How do you say goodbye to someone who changed your life? How do you leave behind a world you'd helped transform? "Thank you," the Queen said simply, "for everything you've given us. Thank you for choosing me. I still don't know why you did, but I'm glad you did. I chose you because I saw in the report something the others missed. You were ordinary, not a hero or a genius, just someone who did his job and tried his best. And I realized that was exactly what we needed. Not someone perfect, but someone real." She reached out and took his hand. Her skin felt cool against his, but her grip was strong. "Come back someday, Minho, when you're ready. We'll be here, still learning, still growing, still grateful." The ship lifted off, and Minho watched through the window as Luminara shrank below him. The glowing forests, the crystal cities, the palace where he'd spent a year teaching perfection how to fail. It all became distant, then disappeared as they jumped to faster than light. 10 years later, General Han Minho stood on the bridge of a joint human Stellarim fleet carrier watching the stars. The exchange programs he'd inspired had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. Humans served on Stellarim ships, Stellarim on human vessels. The cultures had begun to merge and grow together, each learning from the other. A message came through on his private channel. He recognized the encryption immediately, though it had been years since they'd spoken directly. "General Han," Queen Lyra's voice said, "I hope this message finds you well. I'm inviting you to return to Luminara. There's something I want to show you." When Minho arrived at the palace weeks later, he was stunned by the changes. The city had grown, but not with perfect order. Buildings rose in organic patterns, some deliberately asymmetric. Parks mixed wild growth with cultivated beauty. And everywhere he looked, he saw Stellarim people laughing, arguing, creating, living with the kind of messy vitality he remembered from Earth. The Queen met him in the gardens, which had grown even wilder in the years since he'd left. She looked the same, barely aged at all by Stellarim standards, but something in her eyes was different. Warmer, more certain. "You've changed, Luminara," Minho said. "We've changed it together," she corrected. "Your year here started something that continues to grow. Look." She led him to a new section of the city, where a massive building stood covered in colorful artwork. Inside, he found a museum dedicated to imperfection, failed experiments, messy art, stories of mistakes that led to discoveries. Stellarim children ran through the halls, laughing and learning that failure was something to celebrate, not fear. "This is incredible," Minho said. "It's necessary," the Queen replied, "to remind us never to become too perfect again, to stay alive, not just alive, but truly living." They walked back to the gardens as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that were beautifully imperfect. Finally, the queen stopped and turned to face him. "I've spent 10 years learning how to fail at something," she said quietly. "What's that?" "Keeping my distance, being proper, maintaining the boundaries between a queen and a former guest." She stepped closer. "I've failed completely at all of those things, because I've spent 10 years missing you and wondering if you might feel the same." Minho looked at her, this alien queen who had brought him across the galaxy to teach her people how to be imperfect, who had led her forces into battle beside him, who had trusted him when no one else did. "I've been trying not to think about it," he admitted, "telling myself it was impossible, that we're too different, that there are too many complications. And I failed at not thinking about it. Completely and utterly failed." The queen smiled, that genuine smile he'd first seen when she collapsed after the battle. "Good. Then we're both imperfect together." They walked through the gardens as night fell, and the forests began to glow with their bioluminescent light. Around them, the city pulsed with life, messy and chaotic and beautiful. Humans and Stellarim worked together, laughed together, built a future together that neither could have imagined alone. And in that moment, surrounded by the imperfection they'd created together, Minho realized something important. He'd come to Luminara thinking he was just teaching the Stellarim how to fail. But they'd taught him something too, that failure isn't the opposite of success. It's the path to growth, to change, to becoming something better than you were. The statue in the plaza, the one showing Minho fixing broken crystal with light, cast a long shadow in the evening glow. Its inscription had been changed slightly, he noticed. Now it read, "He taught us that to be alive is to be imperfect, and we taught him that imperfection is beautiful." The alien queen had asked for a human as a reward, and no one had understood why. Now, a decade later, the answer was clear. She hadn't been looking for a soldier or a teacher or a diplomat. She'd been looking for someone to remind her people what it meant to be alive. Someone ordinary enough to show them that perfection wasn't the goal. And in the process, she'd found something neither of them expected. Not just renewal for her civilization, but a connection that bridged the space between stars, between species, between the perfect and the imperfect. As they stood together watching the lights of the city, the queen took Minho's hand. "So," she said with an imperfect smile, "shall we try again? I've spent 10 years learning how to fail at keeping my distance." "I think," Minho said, squeezing her hand, "that sounds like a perfect plan." And if that was a contradiction, well, that was exactly the point.